Brewers and beer lovers, it's the fight you've all been waiting for. It's the age-old battle. It's base malt versus specialty malts. Welcome back, brewers and beer lovers, to Flying Wombat TV, the channel where it's all about beer, banter, and definitely bloody good times. So, as we alluded to in the cold opener, it is the Battle of the Titans, the Rumble in the Jungle. We are talking base malts versus specialty malts. Let's kick it off, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So, if you're new to the world of brewing, or you're just curious about the way that beer gets made, let's quickly talk about what malts are. Basically, they're different types of cereals or grains that are used for the brewing process. So they can be oats, wheat, barley, or corn, for example, even rice in some small amounts. That stuff gets used, it gets crushed up, all that sugar gets released into the water. That water then gets fermented with all its sugary goodness into beer. Now, what's a base malt versus a specialty malt? Basically, base malts are the things that make up the majority of the grains or the malts that are used in the brewing process, and you have small amounts of specialty malts. So a base malt is kilned at a much lower temperature for a shorter period of time to make more fermentable sugars, whereas a specialty malt is kilned at a much higher temperature for longer periods of time to create different qualities, flavors, aromas, and potential mouthfeels. So this is barley, this is barley. This one was kilned at a lower temperature, shorter time. This one was kilned at a much higher temperature for a longer period of time, turning it black and giving it the qualities of, espresso, chocolate, that type of thing. Let's get into the battles. It's not going to be a battle per se, but we're going to talk about what specialty malts to use, how much of them to use, and when for what beer styles. So to do that, let's go through the beer rainbow, shall we? Let's kick off our beer rainbow with lagers. Yes, there's a big world of lagers out there, but we're going to keep it simple for today and focus on the pale style of lagers. So stuff like an Australian lager or like a German, light lager like a Helles. So, when it comes to lagers, the specialty side of things is quite small. It's more around the 0 to 5% amount of specialty malt for the total grain bill. Because you're looking for a lager that's typically a starting gravity around 1.04 to 1.05, finishing around 1.004 to 1.08 to 10 kind of thing, which is going to give you around a 4.2 to like a 5.3% style of beer. Now, for that, you need a lot of fermentable sugars to finish dry, so you're going to use things like Pilsner malt, Vienna malt, even ale malt, for example. As far as the specialties go, on an Australian style, it might not use any specialties at all. It might just be base malt. For something like a German, where it's got more bready, biscuity mouthfeel, you might introduce things like light Munich malt, kind of treating it like a specialty, even though it's a base. You might introduce a little bit of crystal malt, or even a little bit of amber malt to make the color a bit more golden, for example. So, generally speaking, 0 to 5% specialty malts for lagers. Next up on our rainbow, pale ales. We're typically looking for a starting gravity of around 1.045 to, on the higher end, 1.06, finishing around 1.010 / 1.015, that kind of territory. It's going to give us a 4.5 to, on the higher side, a 6% style beer. Now, generally speaking, the specialty to base malt ratio is always going to stick around 0 to 5% specialty malts for a pale ale. Doesn't matter if you're brewing an American, an Australian, or a British. That's the kind of the rule of thumb. So, for the base malt, you're going to use something like just a regular ale malt, or you might use something more on the British side, like a Maris Otter, which is going to give you more bread, more biscuit kind of flavors. On the specialty malt side, typically you're really just using crystal malt for the majority of pale ales to give that extra sweetness, body, mouthfeel, but you could introduce other things like a lighter crystal malt, like a Cara Gold, which is like a more of a toffee style flavor instead of a caramel style flavor. You could also introduce things like amber malt if you wanted to change the color a little bit and give it a little bit more of a golden or towards that reddish hue. So yeah, generally speaking, 0 to 5% specialty ratio. IPAs. This is a very big world, but to keep it simple, we're just going to focus on the American styles here, and we're going to go West Coast and East Coast. Starting with the West Coast, we're looking for a starting gravity around that 1.05 to 1.07 kind of territory, finishing around 1.01 to 1.015, which is going to give us an ABV of in the ballpark of anywhere between 5.5% to like a 7.5%, typically speaking. Now, as far as the grains go, for the base malts, we're looking at things like Vienna, ale malt, or even a Maris Otter type thing, or a Golden Promise if you want extra mouthfeel. As far as the specialties go, it's typically around that 5 to 10% ballpark. So it's normally around the crystal malts. You can add things like amber or melanoidin malts or what have you. Typically speaking, most West Coast IPAs are just looking at crystal malts. So whether that's a heavier crystal like a medium or a heavy crystal, or a lighter crystal like a a toffee malt or a light crystal malt. Typically speaking, you're around that 5 to 10% ratio for the specialties. Next up, East Coasts. So this is all those hazier styles of beer. So whether you're calling it a hazy or a NEPA, they're all in the East Coast style. So starting gravities, similar to the West Coast, we're looking at things like 1.05 to 1.07, finishing around 1.01 to 1.020 even, for a final ABV of anywhere between like 5% up to like 7.5% kind of ballpark. As far as the grains go, we are looking at a higher specialty ratio for this one because the NEPA is a hazy and needs that silky, smooth mouthfeel. So as far as the bases go, again, it's things like ale malt, Vienna to some extent, Maris Otter, Golden Promise, all those types of barley style base malts. As far as the specialties go, this is where things get more interesting. We're looking at a ratio of up to 20% specialty malts, and typically we are looking at things like the crystals to give sweetness, whether it's a light, medium, or a heavy crystal, but then we're also looking for the smooth mouthfeel. So we're looking for things like oats, wheat, we don't have any here, different types of oats, whether it's rolled oats or golden naked oats, which are like a crystallized oat. Whatever it might be, you are leaning heavily into the wheats, the oats, and the crystals to give the sweetness, the mouthfeel, the body, the silkiness that you're looking for with a juicy NEPA. Next. Starting to get a bit more color in our beers. Reds and ambers. Big world there again. Could go into the red IPAs, the Irish reds, the British reds, the American ambers. Whatever is, the boat that floats your boat. Whatever floats your boat. Whatever, you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of beers that look red or amber in color. But we're going to focus on broad strokes here. Maybe we go towards the IPA style, higher ABV. So, in that case, we're looking for a starting gravity in the realm of 1.05 to around 1.07, finishing around 1.01 to 1.02. They have a lot more specialty malts in there, so typically the final gravities are on the higher side of things because there's more residual sugar. So it's giving you a final alcohol level around that 5% to like, some of them get to like 8% on some of these red IPAs. They're pretty boozy. So as far as the base malts go, I guess as far as ratios go, typically you're using around, I would say 20 to 30% specialty malt on the higher side for a red or an amber style of beer. On the bases, it's a little more simple. So we're looking at things like ale malt, Maris Otter, Golden Promise, all the typical stuff when it comes to IPAs, ales, all that kind of thing. On the specialties is where we get more interesting. We're looking for red color, which means we need barley or we need grains that are going to give us more red tinges. So things like brown malt can be used to an extent, darker crystal malt, really dark crystal malts, and things like amber malts, melanoidin malts, all those types of things. So melanoidin malts are specialty malts that are specifically created at specific kilning temperatures for periods of time to produce red hues and characteristics. They're actually made to give red color, which is especially useful if you're trying to make a red beer. Aside from that, you can also use things like, rye in a lot of red ales, and that's going to give that spicy, earthy characteristic, like our spicy red IPA for House of the Dragon. Thumbnail card thingy over there somewhere. Anyway, gist of the story here is 20 to 30% specialty malts.
It's the right corner.
Bro, I've been pointing down there all day. Why are you not telling? Why are you telling me now?
It's kind of funny.
Slowly getting towards the darker side, let's talk browns. Again, big world out there. You got browns that are on the American style, which are, a little bit more nutty, touch more hoppy, kind of hoppier browns. Whereas if you go towards the British side, it's more leaning into that real biscuit and, warm bread type character, focusing on malts rather than any hops and, more sweetness. So, again, broad strokes. A brown ale could be between 1.045 to like 1.06 on the really high end, and then finishing around 1.01 to 1.017 sort of territory. Anywhere between that like higher 4% towards the higher 5% kind of realm, maybe on the touching on the higher side, the low 6% on the ABV. Now, talking about the specialties, typically you're using a ratio of around, well, a percentage of around 10 to 15% specialty malts when it comes to a brown, but it is dependent on the style of brown that you're making if you're going more American or British. In any case, as far as the base malts go, again, your typical things, your ale malts, your Maris Otters, your Golden Promises, but in this case, light Munich comes back into play. So that's really giving you your bread, your biscuitiness, your quote-unquote malty characteristics in that brown ale that make it such a warm winter-style drink. On the specialty side of things, again, we're looking for a color here. So we are leaning more towards the more heavily roasted side of things. So darker crystal malts, brown malts, biscuit malts, which we don't have any of here, dark crystals, ambers, pretty much anything that gives you that push towards the brown side of things, the darker color side of things, as well as those nutty, more biscuity, bready, earthy characteristics when it comes to your grain bill. So you're focusing on that 10 to 15% ratio. You go black, you never go back. It's back. Thumbnail up there for our black stout, cocoa nibs and all that kind of thing that we brew. All right, this one is really probably the most heavy on specialties because it's the most complex beer, in my opinion, on the grain side of things. So typically starting gravities around that 1.055, we're going on the higher side here towards even like, there's some blacks that finish like 1.01. It's almost like barley wine level. No, 1.1 I meant to say. Finishing gravities around that, 1.01 to 1.025 even kind of territory. Depends on the type of stout, porter, a black IPA, whatever type of black you're making, they're going to finish differently. Anywhere in that realm of 4.5% with the lighter stouts to, with some of those more barley wines, territory type blacks could be finishing around 8%, 9%, kind of crazy styles of beer. Now, talking specialty malts, they lean heavily into it, around that 15 to 25%, kind of ballpark for the specialties. Base malts, as far as this goes, fairly simple. We're looking at like ale malts, Golden Promises, Maris Otters, and then things like light Munich even. Or as far as bases go, I guess we should also put dark Munich over into the base malts in this particular case. Whoops. A lot of Munich malts can go into the stouts or into the black beers because it really rely on that heavy character, that bready, biscuity, just bit of backbone type character. Now, on the specialties, all the specialties come into play, basically. So it could be things like, especially the black stuff, like roasted barley, just straight up black malt, Eclipse, for example, a roasted wheat, which imparts color without the bitterness, the astringency, all that type of thing. To smooth it out, you're using things like rolled oats, rolled barley, wheat, all those really silky, creamy type malts that add to that mouthfeel and final character. And then things like, brown malt, amber, crystal malt, all that type of stuff gives the sweetness to add to the flavor of the end product. So, as far as the blacks go, it's a really big spectrum out there. Generally speaking, you're looking at that higher alcohol level. You're looking at around 15 to 25% specialty malts. Oh, should have mentioned things like, where is it? Where'd it go? Peated malt. If you're going for a Scottish style, darker style of beer, peated malt can come into play here to give that, smoky and earthy characteristic. So there's a big world of beer out there. There's a lot of different malts going around that you have to choose from. It's a pretty special time to be a home brewer because you've never had more variety than you do right now. And yes, I know there's a lot of beers that we didn't mention today. Don't get up in arms in me in the comments. It's just, otherwise we'll be here forever. Like, we know that there's things like rice that you can use to make a Japanese beer. We can't mention everything here. But we've done our best to mention all the main categories and all the main types of specialty malts. So, we hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Any questions, leave us a comment. And as always, happy brewing, guys. Cheers.